The crown was too heavy for her sister's head. She could see it from where she knelt 20 feet away on the cold marble floor, her wrists bound in silver chains that seared into her flesh like white-hot brands. The metal burned against her skin, melting through layer after layer until she could smell her own blood, her own pain. But she did not flinch. She had learned, in these long months of captivity, that showing pain only made them hurt her more. Her sister stood on the dais, draped in white silk that caught the candlelight and made her glow like a celestial being. The fabric was shot through with silver thread that traced patterns of moons and wolves across her bodice, across her shoulders, down the flowing train that pooled at her feet like liquid starlight. Her golden hair, always golden, always perfect, cascaded over her shoulders in waves that no human woman could achieve without magic. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful. And now, she was being crowned Luna. The Alpha stood beside her, and his hand rested on her sister's shoulder with a possessiveness that made something dark and cold settle deep in her chest, in the hollow place where her heart used to beat. He did not look at her. He had not looked at her in months. Not since the night he had dragged her before the pack council with her arms twisted behind her back and her knees bleeding from where she'd been forced to crawl across broken glass. Not since he had declared her unworthy in front of 300 wolves who had once called her Luna to be. She is human, he had said, and his voice had carried through the great hall with the weight of absolute authority. She carries no wolf. No scent. No strength. The bond was a mistake, a cruel trick of the moon goddess, testing my devotion to this pack. I will not shackle Silvercrest to weakness. I will not watch this bloodline die because I was fool enough to trust in fate. The elders had nodded their ancient heads, their clouded eyes showing no mercy, no compassion. Her sister had wept those false, glittering tears that fooled everyone but her, tears that dried the moment no one was watching. And she had been cast down, stripped of her place at his side, stripped of her name, forbidden from speaking it, forbidden from hearing it spoken. Chained and collared like a dog, like something less than human, less than wolf, less than nothing. But she had not been exiled. No. He had kept her here, in the lower chambers where the stones wept with moisture and the rats grew bold. Kept her close, kept her locked away where she could hear the pack celebrations through the thick walls, where she could smell the feasts she would never taste, where she could feel the phantom pull of a bond that had been carved out of her chest with a silver blade. Because he wanted her to see this. The high priestess stepped forward, her robes the color of moonlight on snow. In her hands, she held the Luna's crown, a circlet of silver and moonstone that had been worn by every Luna of Silvercrest for 300 years. It should have been hers. The bond had chosen her. The moon had marked her with dreams and visions and a pull so strong she had crossed 2 territories on foot just to find him. But the bond had been severed. Carved away in a ritual so painful she had blacked out halfway through, had woken with her chest wrapped in bandages and a scar that would never fade. And now, her sister would wear the crown that should have rested on her head. Do you accept this bond? The priestess intoned, her voice echoing through the silent hall like the toll of a funeral bell. Do you accept the role of Luna, protector of the pack, mother of the bloodline, keeper of the old ways? Her sister's voice was soft. Sweet. Perfect. I do. The Alpha smiled, and it was a smile of victory, of vindication. The crown was placed on her sister's head, and the weight of it made her neck bow slightly. Made her stumble just a fraction before she caught herself. And the pack erupted into howls of celebration that shook the rafters, that rattled the chains binding her wrists. She knelt in her silver chains, surrounded by the sound of their joy, drowning in it, choking on it. And she felt nothing. Nothing but the faint, steady pulse in her chest, the pulse that had been growing stronger every day since the rejection, since the severance, since the night she should have died but didn't. The pulse that whispered in a voice she did not yet understand, in a language older than the pack, older than the bloodline, older than the wolves themselves. You are not human. You are not weak. You are so much more than they know. The Alpha finally looked at her. His silver eyes met hers across the hall, across the sea of celebrating wolves, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw it. The flicker of regret. Of doubt. Of a question he would never ask aloud, what have I done? And then he turned away, turned back to the golden-haired beauty at his side. Her sister leaned into him, pressing a kiss to his jaw, and the crowd roared even louder, stamping their feet, calling for the traditional hunt to celebrate the new Luna's ascension. She lowered her head, letting her dark hair fall forward to hide her face, to hide the expression she could not quite control. And she smiled. Because she had felt the crack, the first hairline fracture in the foundation of his perfect new world. And she was going to tear it all down, stone by stone, until nothing remained but ash and memory. The Silver Crest Pack was the oldest in the Northern Territories, and they never let anyone forget it. Their bloodline stretched back to the first wolves, the ones who had walked beside the moon goddess herself when the world was young and magic flowed through the earth like water. Their alphas were not chosen by strength alone, not by combat or challenge or the crude law of tooth and claw. They were chosen by the sacred bond, the pull of destiny that tied an alpha to his Luna, two halves of a whole, two souls marked by the goddess to rule together. The bond was absolute, unbreakable, eternal. It could not be severed by choice. It could not be ignored or denied. When the moon marked two souls as mates, they were bound for life, their fates intertwined so deeply that to lose one was to lose half of yourself. Until he had broken it. Until he had proven that even the goddess's will could be shattered if you were willing to pay the price in blood and pain and sacrilege. The ritual had been brutal beyond measure. The severance required blood hers and pain hers and the willing participation of both parties. But she had not been willing. She had screamed until her voice shattered. She had fought until they had to pin her down with 6 guards holding her arms, her legs, her head. And in the end, he had held her down himself while the priestess carved the sigil into her chest, directly over her heart, the silver blade cutting deep enough to scar bone. "You are free," the priestess had whispered, her hands stained red to the elbows. "The moon has released you from this bond. You are no longer bound to him." But the words had been a lie, and they both knew it. She was not free. She was a prisoner in every way that mattered. The Alpha had declared her too dangerous to exile, too valuable as a cautionary tale to simply kill. "She knows our secrets," he had told the council, his voice steady, his eyes cold. "She knows our patrol routes, our weaknesses, the names of our allies and enemies. If she falls into enemy hands, if she runs to the Shadowfang Pack or the Blood Moon Pack or any of the others who would see us destroyed, she could give them everything they need to annihilate us." So she had been kept. Locked in the lower chambers of the pack house, in a cell that had once held traitors and murderers and wolves who had gone feral. She was given only enough food to survive, only enough water to keep her alive. She was forbidden from shifting, not that she could. She had never shifted. She had never felt the wolf that should have been sleeping inside her, waiting to wake. Because she was human. Or so they believed. Or so she had believed, until the dreams began. Her sister had visited her once, in those early days when the wounds were still fresh and the scar on her chest still wept clear fluid that smelled like moonlight. She had stood outside the cell, her hands folded delicately in front of her, her expression one of practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry," her sister had said, and she had sounded almost genuine. "I never wanted this. But you have to understand, he needs a Luna who can give him heirs. Strong heirs. Wolf heirs. You can't even shift. What kind of pups would you have given him? Human children in a wolf pack? They would have been slaughtered the moment they came of age." She had said nothing, just stared at her sister through the bars. Her sister had sighed, a soft, disappointed sound. "You were always so stubborn. If you had just accepted your place, if you had just stepped aside gracefully, none of this would have happened. You forced his hand. You made him do this." And then she had left, her footsteps fading down the stone corridor, leaving behind only the scent of roses and lies. The months that followed were a blur of isolation and silence and a darkness so complete it felt like drowning. But in that silence, in that suffocating dark, something had begun to stir. Something that had been sleeping, buried deep beneath layers of human flesh and mortal weakness. It started as a whisper, a voice in the back of her mind, faint and distant, speaking in a language she did not know but somehow understood. Then came the dreams. Dreams of a woman with silver hair that flowed like mercury and eyes like molten gold, standing on a battlefield drenched in blood. Surrounded by the bodies of wolves who had dared to challenge her. "You are my daughter," the woman had said, her voice echoing across the corpse-strewn field. "And you are waking." She had dismissed it as madness, as her mind's desperate attempt to escape the horror of her reality, to create a fantasy where she was something more than a rejected mate rotting in a cell. But then the power had come. It was small at first, a flicker of heat in her palms when she pressed them together, a sudden gust of wind that extinguished the torches in her cell and left her in complete darkness. The guards had blamed it on drafts, on faulty ironwork, on the age of the building. But she knew. She was changing. And on the night of her sister's coronation, as she knelt in silver chains and watched the crown placed on the wrong head, she felt it fully for the first time. The wolf. Not weak. Not broken. Not human. Ancient. Royal. Divine. Hers. They left her chained in the great hall until dawn broke over the eastern mountains. The celebration had raged through the night, wolves drinking themselves into stupors, dancing until their feet bled, reveling in the new luna's ascension with a fervor that bordered on religious ecstasy. Her sister had sat on the throne that should have been hers, radiant and glowing in the candlelight, accepting praise and gifts from the pack members who lined up to bow before her, to swear their loyalty, to promise their lives in her service. The Alpha had stood at her side the entire time, his hand never leaving her shoulder, his expression one of smug satisfaction. He had won. He had chosen strength over sentiment, power over prophecy. And the pack had rewarded him for it. And she had knelt. Silent. Still. Watching every moment with eyes that burned from lack of sleep and tears she refused to shed. When the last of the pack finally stumbled out into the early morning light, drunk on wine and victory, a guard approached her. He was young, barely 20. With a face still soft with youth and eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. "You're to return to your cell," he muttered, fumbling with the key to her chains. The silver fell away from her wrists with a clatter that echoed through the empty hall. Her skin beneath was raw and blistered, the flesh burned down to the muscle in some places. She had felt every second of it, every minute of the long night, but she had not made a sound. She stood slowly, her legs stiff from hours of kneeling, her joints screaming in protest. The burns on her wrists throbbed with every heartbeat, sending waves of pain up her arms. "Thank you," she said quietly, and her voice was hoarse from disuse. The guard flinched at the sound, actually stumbled backward as if she had struck him. His hand went to the hilt of the blade at his hip, and for a moment she thought he might draw it, might run her through right there just to be safe. She almost smiled at the thought. Instead, she turned and walked toward the door that led to the lower chambers, to her cell, to the darkness that had become more familiar than light. The guard followed at a distance, keeping several paces between them, his breathing quick and nervous. But as she reached the threshold, as her hand touched the iron handle, she paused. The Alpha was standing at the far end of the hall, his back to her. Her sister had retired to their chambers, to the Luna's chambers, to the rooms that should have been hers, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his throne and his hollow victory. He was staring at it now, at the seat of power he had fought so hard to keep. And his shoulders were slumped. She could have left. She should have left. The guard was shifting nervously behind her, clearly wanting this interaction to end, clearly terrified of what might happen if she spoke. But something made her open her mouth. "Does she make you happy?" she asked, and her voice carried across the empty hall like a bell. The Alpha went rigid. Every muscle in his body tensed, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Slowly, so slowly it seemed to take an eternity, he turned to face her. For a long moment, he said nothing. His silver eyes scanned her face, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the hollow of her cheeks, the way her clothes hung on her frame from months of near starvation. And she saw it again, clear as daylight, that flicker of something that might have been regret, might have been guilt, might have been the ghost of the man who had once looked at her like she was his entire world. "Go to your cell," he said finally, and his voice was cold, flat, empty of all emotion. "Does she?" she pressed, taking a step toward him despite the guard's sharp intake of breath behind her. His jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. "That is none of your concern." "You're right," she said softly, and she took another step, and another, until she was standing in the center of the hall, until there was nothing between them but empty space and broken vows. "It isn't. You made sure of that when you carved our bond out of my chest." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or anger, or both. You did this to yourself, he said, and now there was heat in his voice, fury rising to the surface. You refused to step aside. You refused to accept that you weren't strong enough, weren't wolf enough to stand at my side. I gave you a choice. You gave me nothing, she interrupted, and her voice was quiet but it cut through his words like a blade through silk. You took everything. My place. My purpose. My future. And you kept me here, locked in the dark, so you could parade your new mate in front of me like a trophy. I kept you here because you're dangerous, he snarled. No, she said, and she smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. You kept me here because you wanted me to see what I'd lost. You wanted me to watch her take everything that should have been mine. You wanted me to break. He took a step toward her, his wolf rising, his eyes flashing gold. Get back to your cell Before you what? She asked, spreading her arms wide. Kill me. You should have done that months ago. It would have been kinder. For a moment, she thought he might actually do it. His hands were shaking with the effort of holding his wolf back, his breathing ragged. But then something in his expression shifted. Softened. I loved you, he whispered, and the words hung in the air between them like a confession. She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No pain. No longing. No echo of the bond that had once tied them together. No, she said. You loved the idea of me. The prophecy. The destiny. But you never loved me enough to fight for me when it mattered. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the empty hall. And as the cell door closed behind her, as the lock clicked into place, she pressed her hand to her chest, to the scar where the bond had been carved away. It was glowing. Faint. Golden. Warm beneath her fingertips. The bond was gone, severed and destroyed. But something else had taken its place. Something ancient and powerful and infinitely more dangerous than a simple mating bond. She smiled in the darkness of her cell. And she began to plan. 3 days later, everything changed. She heard the commotion from her cell, the sudden flurry of activity in the packhouse above, the sound of hooves on cobblestone echoing through the ventilation shafts, the shouts of guards calling for the gates to be opened. Visitors were common enough in Silver Crest. As the oldest pack, they received delegations regularly from smaller packs seeking alliances or guidance. But something about this arrival felt different. The energy in the air had shifted, crackling with tension she could feel even through the thick stone walls. She thought nothing of it. What did pack politics matter to her now? She was dead to them in all but name. A ghost haunting the lower chambers. Until the door to her cell opened. She looked up from where she sat on the narrow cot, expecting the usual guard with her meager meal, stale bread and water, sometimes a piece of dried meat if they were feeling generous. Instead, a man stood in the doorway. He was tall, taller than the alpha, which was saying something, with dark hair that fell just past his shoulders in waves that caught the torchlight. He wore traveling leathers, dust-stained and worn from days on the road, and a sword hung at his hip, the pommel wrapped in black leather that had been shaped by years of use. His face was angular, all sharp planes and hard edges, but his eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and silver and infinite. But it was his scent that stopped her cold, that made her breath catch in her throat. Wolf. Powerful. Ancient. The scent of rain and steel and something darker, something that whispered of bloodlines older than memory. And familiar. So terribly, impossibly familiar. You're his brother, she said, and it wasn't a question. The man's lips curved into a faint smile. And you're the discarded mate. The words should have stung. They should have cut her open and left her bleeding. But she had heard worse in the past months, had been called worse things by wolves who once would have died to protect her. I mean no offense, he said quickly, raising a hand as if to ward off her anger. I'm simply stating facts. My brother has a talent for discarding things he doesn't understand. He stepped into the cell, and she noticed the guards hadn't followed him. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who knew he could kill everyone in this building if he chose to, and that knowledge made him untouchable. What do you want? She asked, staying seated on the cot, refusing to show weakness by standing. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp and assessing, taking in the burns on her wrists, the thinness of her frame, the fading bruises that still shadowed her skin from the severance ritual. "I came to see if the rumors were true," he said finally. "That my brother severed a sacred bond to wed a weaker wolf. They're true. And that he kept you here, chained, caged like an animal." She said nothing, just held his gaze. The brother crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, she could see the differences between him and the alpha more clearly. Where the alpha was all sharp edges and cold control, his beauty the kind that cut like glass, this man was softer somehow. Warmer. But no less dangerous. Perhaps more so, because the danger was hidden beneath a veneer of civility. "You don't smell human," he said quietly, and his voice was thoughtful, curious. Her breath caught. "What?" "You smell like smoke and steel," he continued, still watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "Like something old. Something buried deep but not quite dead." "I don't know what you're talking about." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. He tilted his head, and his smile widened just a fraction. "Liar." She glared at him, and to her surprise, he laughed, a low, genuine sound that echoed strangely in the small cell. "I like you," he said, still smiling. "I don't care." "You should," he said, standing to his full height and looking down at her. "Because I'm going to make you an offer. I don't want anything from you." "Not from me," he corrected, turning toward the door but pausing in the threshold. "From fate. From destiny. From whatever force in this universe decided that my brother was fool enough to throw away his true mate." He looked back at her, and his expression had shifted into something harder, something edged with purpose. "There's a gathering in 3 months," he said. "The Council of Alphas. Every pack in the Northern Territories will be there, the old bloodlines, the new ones. All of them gathered in one place to discuss territory disputes and alliance treaties and all the tedious politics that keep our world from devolving into chaos. My brother will be there, with his new Luna. So come with me," he said, and his voice dropped lower, became almost intimate. "Let me take you out of this cell. Let me show you what you really are. Let me help you become what you were always meant to be." "Why?" She stood now, moving toward him. "Why would you do that? Why would you help the woman your brother rejected? Doesn't that make you a traitor to your own blood?" His eyes gleamed with something that might have been malice, might have been justice. "Because my brother stole something that wasn't his to take," he said. "He broke sacred law. He severed a bond blessed by the goddess herself. And I've always believed in balance. In cosmic justice." He paused, his smile turning sharp as a blade. "In revenge." She stared at him, her mind racing. This could be a trap. It probably was a trap. The alpha might have sent his brother to test her, to see if she would betray the pack, to give him an excuse to finally kill her. But something in those storm-gray eyes told her this man was telling the truth. And more importantly, she had nothing left to lose. "When do we leave?" she asked. His smile became genuine. "Tomorrow at dawn. Be ready." She did not trust him. How could she? Trust had been carved out of her along with the bond, leaving only scar tissue and suspicion. But she also did not refuse when he returned the next night, as promised, carrying a cloak of dark wool and a leather bag filled with supplies, travel bread, dried meat, a waterskin, and a small knife with a bone handle. "We leave at dawn," he said, tossing the cloak onto her cot. "Pack light. We have a long journey ahead." "The guards won't let me leave," she said, even though she was already reaching for the cloak, already imagining what it would feel like to walk beyond these walls. "The guards answer to me when I'm on Packlands," he said with that same casual confidence. "You're my guest now. My responsibility. Your brother won't allow it." The second son's smile was cold enough to freeze fire. "My brother doesn't have a choice. I outrank him in the old laws. I'm firstborn, even if I chose to leave rather than challenge him for the alpha position. And the sacred laws state that any wolf has the right to offer sanctuary to another, especially one who has been wronged." He paused. "Besides, he already rejected you. You're not his concern anymore." The words should have hurt. They didn't. When dawn came, true dawn, with the sun just barely cresting the horizon, she walked out of her cell for the first time in months. The stone corridor seemed impossibly bright after so long in the dark. Her legs shook with each step, weak from disuse, but she refused to stumble. The guards watched but did not move to stop her. One of them, the young guard from the coronation, looked like he might say something, but a sharp look from the second son silenced him. Pack members were already stirring as they made their way through the pack house and out into the courtyard. She saw their faces turn toward her, saw shock and confusion ripple through them as they recognized the rejected mate walking free. Whispers followed in her wake like shadows. Is that? She's supposed to be locked up. Why is the second son? She kept her head high and her eyes forward, following the second son to where 2 horses waited, already saddled and provisioned for a long journey. And then the alpha emerged from the pack house. His hair was disheveled, his clothes the same ones he'd worn the night before. He clearly hadn't slept. And when his eyes locked onto her standing in the courtyard with his brother, fury blazed across his face like wildfire. What is this? He demanded, striding toward them. The second son moved smoothly between them. His body language relaxed, but his hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword. She's coming with me, he said calmly. Like hell she is. The alpha's voice was a growl, his wolf rising to the surface. She's not your mate anymore, the second son said, and his voice carried across the courtyard, ensuring every wolf within earshot could hear. You severed the bond. You rejected her. You have no claim on her, no right to keep her, no authority over her movements. She's a security risk. She's a person, the second son interrupted, and now there was steel in his voice. And she's under my protection now. If you want to challenge that, brother, then challenge me. Here. Now. In front of the entire pack. The alpha's hands clenched into fists. His whole body was trembling with the effort of holding his wolf back, of not shifting right there and tearing into his brother. For a moment, she thought he might do it. Thought he might actually challenge his own brother over her, over the woman he'd claimed meant nothing. But then her sister appeared. She glided down the packhouse steps like a vision in a pale blue dress, her hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. She slipped her hand into the alpha's, her touch gentle, calming. Let her go, her sister said softly, but her voice carried that same false sweetness it always had. She's nothing to us anymore. Let her leave with your brother. Good riddance. The words landed like blows, each one calculated to hurt. But she felt nothing. Just watched as the alpha's jaw tightened, watched as his gaze flicked between her and his brother and his new mate. Fine, he bit out finally. Take her. But when she betrays you, when she runs to our enemies with our secrets, don't say I didn't warn you. The second son inclined his head in a mockery of a bow. Duly noted, brother. He turned to her, offering his arm with exaggerated courtesy. Shall we? She took it. Her burned wrists protesting the movement but her spine straight. And as they walked through the gates of Silver Crest, as she crossed the threshold she thought she'd never cross again, she did not look back. Not at the alpha standing rigid in the courtyard. Not at her sister with her false sympathy and triumphant smile. Not at the pack that had rejected her, broken her, tried to bury her alive. She looked only forward. Toward whatever future waited beyond these walls. Toward whatever she was meant to become. They traveled for 2 weeks through wilderness that grew progressively wilder, progressively darker. The second son was a considerate travel companion, which surprised her. He set a steady pace that didn't push her weakened body too far. He stopped to rest the horses regularly, made camp before full dark, cooked meals that were simple but filling. At night, he built fires and prepared their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames, always giving her space, always maintaining a respectful distance. He did not push her for conversation. Did not ask invasive questions about her time in the cell or her feelings about the rejection. He simply existed beside her, a solid presence that somehow made the vast wilderness feel less hostile. But she still waited for the trap to spring. Still watched him from the corner of her eye, still slept with the bone-handled knife under her pillow. On the 15th day, they reached the border of the Shadowlands. She'd heard of this place, every wolf had. It was the wild territory that belonged to no pack, where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy even at high noon. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was blessed. Most simply avoided it. "We're here," the second son said, dismounting from his horse. She looked around at the wall of trees, at the darkness that seemed to pulse between them. "Where is here, exactly?" "The place where you'll learn what you are." He gestured toward the forest. "Where you'll learn what was stolen from you." Every instinct screamed at her not to follow him into that darkness. But what choice did she have? Go back to Silvercrest and beg the Alpha to take her back? Wander the territories alone until she starved or was killed by rogues? She dismounted and followed him into the trees. The air grew colder almost immediately, the temperature dropping with each step. The forest floor was thick with moss that muffled their footsteps, and the trees, ancient oaks and pines that must have been growing for centuries, pressed in close on either side. She could hear things moving in the undergrowth, could smell earth and rot and something else, something wild and untamed. They walked for what felt like hours, though the unchanging twilight made it impossible to judge time. The second son moved with the confidence of someone who had walked this path before, navigating through the trees without hesitation. And then, suddenly, the trees opened into a clearing. In the center stood a woman. She was ancient, her hair pure silver, flowing down past her waist like a river of moonlight. Her skin was lined with age, mapped with wrinkles that spoke of centuries lived. She wore robes the color of storm clouds, and her feet were bare against the moss. But it was her eyes that made her breath stop. Golden. Molten. Burning with an inner fire that seemed to illuminate the entire clearing. The same eyes from her dreams. "You," she whispered, and her voice was barely audible. The woman smiled, and her face transformed, became somehow ageless despite the wrinkles. "Hello, daughter," she said, and her voice was warm, welcoming, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "I've been waiting for you." She stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think. This was impossible. This woman was from her dreams, from her fevered imaginings in the cell. She couldn't be real. But the second son was bowing, actually bowing, to this woman. His head lowered in a gesture of deepest respect. "Lady Ilara," he said. "I've brought her, as you requested." "You've done well," the woman, Ilara, said. Her eyes never left her face. "Come closer, child. Let me see you properly." Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her across the clearing until she stood directly in front of the ancient woman. Ilara reached out, her hands gnarled with age but still steady, and cupped her face gently. Her touch was warm, warmer than it should have been, and where her skin made contact, she felt something spark, a recognition that went deeper than memory. "You look like her," Ilara whispered, and there was grief in her voice, old and worn but still sharp. "You have her eyes. My granddaughter's eyes." "What?" She tried to pull away, but Ilara's grip tightened. "Your mother," Ilara said. "She was the last of my blood. The last moon-blessed to walk this earth before you." "Moon-blessed?" The word felt foreign on her tongue. Ilara released her face and stepped back, her golden eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel laid bare. "Sit," the old woman commanded, gesturing to the moss. "And I will tell you the story of what you are. Of what was stolen from you before you were even born." She sat, though her legs felt like they might give out anyway. The second son remained standing at the edge of the clearing, a silent sentinel. Ilara lowered herself to the ground with surprising grace and began to speak. Long ago, when wolves first learned to walk on two legs, the moon goddess blessed certain bloodlines with her power. These wolves, the moon-blessed, were her chosen champions. They did not shift like common wolves. They did not become beasts of fur and fang. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. They became something more. They channeled the goddess herself, became vessels for her divine fury. "That's just a myth," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Ilara smiled. "Tell me, child in your cell. In the dark, did you feel something stirring? Did you hear a voice that wasn't yours? Did power spark from your fingertips when your emotions ran high?" She said nothing. But Ilara saw the truth in her silence. "Your mother was my granddaughter," Ilara continued. "She was born with the mark of the goddess, the golden eyes, the silver in her hair, the power that could level mountains. But she was hunted. Other wolves feared her power, coveted it, wanted to use it for their own ends. So she ran. She fled to the human territories and hid herself, suppressing her wolf, living half a life so that she might live at all. She fell in love, she whispered, remembering the bedtime stories her mother had told her before she died. Stories of a wanderer, a rogue wolf who had swept her off her feet. She did, Ilara confirmed. With a rogue who promised to protect her. They had you. And your mother died bringing you into this world, her power burning too bright, too hot. Your father, broken by grief, left you with humans and disappeared into the wild. He couldn't bear to look at you, couldn't bear to see her eyes in your face. The words hurt in a way she hadn't expected. She'd always known she was unwanted, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. But before she died, Ilara said, her voice softening, your mother placed a seal on you. She hid your wolf so deep that even you couldn't find her. She wanted you to have a chance at a normal life, wanted you to be safe from those who would hunt you for your power. Then why am I here? She asked, and her voice broke. Why tell me this now? Why not let me stay hidden? Ilara's smile was sad. Because the seal is breaking, child. It started to crack the moment that Alpha rejected you, the moment he tried to sever a bond with a moon-blessed. You can't cut the goddess's chosen loose, she simply finds another way to tie you to your fate. She looked down at her hands, and for the first time, she saw it, the faint golden glow beneath her skin, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The bond you felt with that Alpha, Ilara said, was not the moon's will. It was a test. The goddess wanted to see if you would break, if you would beg for scraps from a man who didn't deserve you. And when you didn't, when you endured, you proved yourself worthy. Worthy of what? Ilara stood, offering her hand. Of awakening. Of claiming your birthright. Of becoming what you were always meant to be. She stared at that outstretched hand for a long moment. Then she took it. Ilara pulled her to her feet and placed both hands on her chest, directly over the scar from the severance. This will hurt, the old woman warned. And then the world exploded into light. Pain ripped through her like wildfire, white-hot and all-consuming. Her back arched, her mouth opened in a scream that had no sound, and she felt something inside her, something that had been sleeping, dormant, caged, suddenly roar to life. It was not a wolf. Not like the ones she'd seen the pack members shift into, not a beast of fur and fang and instinct. It was power. Raw and ancient and devastating. It poured through her veins like liquid gold, burning away everything weak, everything human, everything false. She could feel her body changing, feel muscles strengthening, bones hardening, senses sharpening until she could hear the heartbeat of every living thing in the forest. The scar on her chest, the mark of her rejection, began to glow. Brighter and brighter until it outshone even Ilara's eyes, until the entire clearing was illuminated by it. And then she felt it. The presence. The consciousness that was not her own but was somehow inseparably part of her. Welcome, daughter, a voice whispered, and it was the voice from her dreams, the voice that had whispered to her in the cell. Welcome home. The light exploded outward in a shockwave that bent the trees and sent birds screaming into the sky. When it faded. When the world stopped spinning, she collapsed to her knees in the moss. But when she looked up, everything was different. The world was sharper, clearer, more vivid than it had ever been. She could see every leaf on every tree, could count them if she wanted to. She could hear the second sun's heartbeat from across the clearing, could smell his surprise and approval. Could sense Ilara's satisfaction like a warm blanket. What? She looked down at her hands, and they were glowing. Faintly golden, like they'd been dipped in sunlight. What did you do to me? I didn't do anything, Ilara said, and she was smiling, pride written across her ancient face. I simply removed the seal your mother placed on you. This, she gestured at the glowing hands, at the power radiating from her like heat, this is what you always were. She stood slowly, testing her balance. Her legs didn't shake. Her body didn't feel weak or broken or half-starved. She felt strong. Stronger than she'd ever felt in her entire life. The bond, she said suddenly, pressing a hand to her chest. It's gone. Completely. Because it was never real, Ilara confirmed. The Alpha was never your mate. The goddess was simply testing you, seeing if you were strong enough to endure rejection. And you were. She looked at the second son, who was watching her with those storm-grey eyes, a small smile playing at his lips. You knew, she said. You knew what I was. I suspected, he corrected. Your scent gave you away. No human smells like smoke and steel and old magic. But I had to be sure before I brought you to Elara. Why? She asked, and she was surprised by how strong her voice sounded, how steady. Why help me? What do you gain from this? The second son's smile widened, became something sharper, more dangerous. Revenge, he said simply. My brother has ruled Silvercrest for too long with his arrogance and his blind certainty that is always right. He broke sacred law when he severed your bond. He spat on the goddess's will. And I want to see him face the consequences. And you think I can make him face those consequences? I think, the second son said, moving closer, that you're going to walk back into that council meeting in 3 months, radiating power that will make every alpha in the north bow down. I think you're going to stand before my brother and his pathetic replacement Luna, and you're going to show them exactly what they threw away. He paused. And then, you're going to destroy him. The words should have frightened her. Should have made her hesitate. But instead, she felt something dark and cold and satisfied settle in her chest. When do we start training? She asked. Elara laughed, the sound like bells in the wind. Right now, daughter. We have 3 months to turn you from a caged wolf into a goddess. And we're not going to waste a single moment. If you think her awakening means she's ready to face him, you're wrong. The real transformation hasn't even begun. The training was more brutal than anything she could have imagined. Elara did not coddle her, did not offer comfort or encouragement or gentle guidance. She simply pushed harder and harder and harder until she thought her body might shatter, her mind might break, until she begged for mercy that never came. You are not fragile, Elara snapped when she collapsed after a particularly grueling session, her body shaking with exhaustion, her hands bleeding from channeling too much power too fast. You are the goddess incarnate. Stop acting like you're made of glass. She learned to channel the power that now flowed through her veins like a second heartbeat. Learned to shape it, to direct it, to wield it like a weapon that could cut through steel and stone and flesh with equal ease. Elara taught her the old ways, the rituals and words that had been passed down through generations of Moonblessed, the prayers that could call down the moon's light even in broad daylight. The movements that could summon storms or still them with a gesture. You do not shift like common wolves, Elara explained, watching as she practiced summoning and dismissing a shield of pure golden light. You do not need to. The goddess lives in your blood, in your bones, in every breath you take. You can summon the strength of 100 wolves with a thought. You can command the very elements if you have the will. And the will, that was something she had in abundance. Every ache in her muscles, every burn in her lungs, every moment of pain reminded her of the cell, of the chains, of kneeling while her sister wore her crown. And that made her push harder. The second son sparred with her daily. At first, he held back, treating her like she was still the broken thing that had walked out of Silvercrest. But after she disarmed him 3 times in one morning, he stopped being gentle. Your sister will have trained, he said, circling her with a blade in hand, his movements fluid and deadly. The Alpha will have ensured she knows how to defend herself, that she can at least put up a show of strength. You need to be better than her. You need to be better than all of them. I will be, she promised, and it wasn't a boast. It was a vow. He came at her fast, his sword whistling through the air. She didn't dodge, didn't need to. She raised her hand, and the blade stopped mid-swing, caught in a net of golden light that solidified into something stronger than steel. The second son's eyes widened. Impressive. She twisted her wrist, and the light constricted, wrenching the sword from his grip and sending it flying across the clearing. Again, she said. He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator recognizing another predator. With pleasure. They fought until the sun set and rose again. Fought until her movements became instinct, until she could anticipate his attacks before he made them. Until she could disarm him in under 30 seconds using nothing but the power in her blood. Elara watched from the edge of the clearing, her ancient face impassive. But sometimes, late at night when she thought no one was watching, she would smile. The weeks blurred together. Days of training that left her gasping and bleeding and stronger than she'd been the day before. Nights of studying the old texts Alara produced from somewhere, learning about the history of the Moonblessed, about the wolves who had carried the goddess's power before her. Most of them had died young, burned out by the sheer intensity of what they carried. Used up by alphas who saw them as weapons rather than people. Your mother was smart to hide you, Alara said one night, sitting by the fire while she studied a text written in a language she was still learning to read. If the other packs had known what you were, they would have fought wars to claim you. Would have bred you like cattle to try to produce more Moonblessed. Would have drained you dry until there was nothing left. But the alpha didn't know, she said, looking up from the text. He thought I was human. Weak. And that, Alara said with satisfaction, is going to make his downfall so much sweeter. As the weeks passed, she began to notice other changes beyond the obvious ones. Her senses were sharper, yes, but it was more than that. She could feel the pack bonds of the wolves around her, the connection between Alara and the second son, who apparently had known each other for decades. Could sense the life force of every creature in the forest, could track them by feeling alone. And the power kept growing. Every day, she could channel more of it, hold it longer, shape it into more complex forms. Alara taught her to create weapons from nothing, swords of light that never dulled, shields that could withstand any blow, chains that could bind even the strongest alpha. You're learning faster than your mother did. Alara commented one afternoon, watching as she successfully completed a particularly difficult summoning ritual on her first try. She was powerful, but she was afraid of her power. You. The old woman's smile was fierce. You embrace it. Because I know what it's like to be powerless, she said quietly. I know what it's like to be at someone else's mercy. I'm never going to let anyone have that kind of power over me again. Good, Alara said. That rage, that determination, hold on to it. You'll need it when you face him. The Alpha. She thought about him less and less as the weeks passed. The bond was gone, truly and completely gone. Sometimes she had to remind herself that she'd once believed he was her destined mate, that she'd once looked at him and seen her future. Now when she thought of him, all she felt was cold satisfaction. He had tried to break her. Had tried to bury her in the dark and make her disappear. Instead, he'd forged her into something that would be his undoing. By the end of 2 months, she barely recognized herself. Her body had changed, not dramatically, but in subtle ways that spoke of the power now flowing through her. She was leaner, harder, every muscle defined and strong. Her dark hair had grown longer, and when the light hit it right, there were silver threads running through it, marking her as moonblessed. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. They glowed now, even when she wasn't actively channeling power. Gold, like the goddess who lived inside her. The second son noticed, of course. He noticed everything. You look different, he said one morning as they prepared for another sparring session. I am different, she replied, and it was the truth. The broken thing that had left Silvercrest was gone, burned away in the fires of her awakening. What remained was something new. Something dangerous. Are you ready? He asked, and she knew he wasn't talking about the sparring. No, she said honestly. But I will be. He smiled. That's good enough. The final month of training was the hardest. Alara stopped pulling her punches, stopped giving her time to rest and recover. She pushed and pushed and pushed until she thought she might shatter from the pressure. The council gathering is not just a political meeting, Alara explained, watching as she practiced maintaining multiple shields while simultaneously attacking with constructs of light. It's a show of power. Every alpha will be posturing, trying to prove they're the strongest, the most worthy. If you walk in there looking weak, they'll eat you alive. I won't look weak, she promised. No, Alara agreed, her golden eyes gleaming with pride. You won't. They worked on her control, on keeping the power leashed until she wanted to release it. She learned to mask her scent, to hide the glow in her eyes, to appear human when she needed to. And then learned to release it all at once in a display that could bring entire packs to their knees. The second son taught her pack politics, explaining the complex web of alliances and enmities that connected the northern territories. He told her who would be at the council, which alphas were likely to support her and which would see her as a threat. My brother has allies, he warned. Alphas who respect his strength, who benefit from his leadership. When you confront him, they'll take his side, at least initially. Let them, she said. They'll change their minds once they see what I can do. And if they don't? She looked at him, and her eyes blazed gold. Then they'll learn the hard way that you don't cross the goddess's chosen. He laughed at that, genuine and approving. I almost feel sorry for them. Don't, she said. They chose their side when they stood by and let him break sacred law. As the final days before the council approached, Ilara gave her a gift. It was a dress, if it could be called that. Black silk that clung to her body like a second skin. With a high collar and long sleeves that ended in points over her hands. The bodice was embroidered with silver thread in patterns that matched the tattoos Ilara bore, ancient symbols of the moon and the goddess. And the skirt split high on both sides, allowing freedom of movement. You're going to walk into that council as what you are, Ilara said, helping her into the dress. Not as the rejected human. Not as the broken mate. As the last moon-blessed. As the goddess's champion. She looked at herself in the polished bronze mirror Ilara produced, and she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked like a queen. Like something ancient and powerful and utterly untouchable. I'm ready, she said. Ilara smiled. Yes. You are. On the night before they were to leave for the council, Ilara gave her one final lesson. The Alpha will try to claim you're dangerous, the old woman said. He'll try to turn the other packs against you, to paint you as a threat that needs to be eliminated. You must be prepared for that. I am. Are you prepared to kill him? Ilara asked bluntly. Because that's what it may come to. He broke sacred law. The penalty for severing a bond with a moonblessed is death. She thought about it. Really thought about it. Could she kill him? The man who had once been her everything? If I have to, she said finally. But I'd rather make him live. Make him watch as I take everything he values. His pack. His power. His perfect new life. She paused. Death would be too easy. Ilara's smile was sharp as broken glass. You're learning. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her tent, staring up at the canvas ceiling, and thought about everything that had happened. Everything she'd lost. Everything she'd gained. 3 months ago, she'd been nothing. A rejected mate rotting in a cell, waiting to die. Now she was the last moonblessed. The goddess's chosen. Powerful enough to level cities if she wanted to. And tomorrow. She would walk back into the world that had tried to destroy her. She pressed a hand to her chest, to the scar that no longer hurt, that had become something else, a reminder of what she'd survived, of what had tried to break her and failed. Are you ready? The goddess's voice whispered in her mind. Yes, she whispered back. And she was. The Council of Alphas was held in the Grand Hall of the Winterfang Pack, deep in the northern mountains. The hall was ancient, carved directly into the mountainside, with walls of natural stone and a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Torches lined the walls, casting dancing light across the hundreds of wolves gathered inside. Every alpha from the northern territories was there, along with their lunars, their heirs, their most trusted advisors. The hall was filled with the scent of power, so many dominant wolves in one place made the air thick with it. They arrived after dark, when the council was already well underway. The second sun had timed it perfectly. They would make an entrance rather than simply filtering in with the other attendees. She stood outside the massive doors, hidden in the shadows, listening to the voices inside. She could pick out individual conversations, could hear the alphas arguing over territory disputes and trade agreements and all the mundane politics that kept their world functioning. And then she heard his voice. The alpha's voice, carrying clear and strong across the hall. The Silvercrest Pack remains committed to maintaining the old ways, he was saying. We will not compromise on tradition for the sake of convenience. Her hands clenched into fists. The old ways. Like the sacred bond he'd violated. The second son appeared beside her, dressed in formal leathers with his sword at his hip. He looked every inch the warrior prince, the firstborn son who'd walked away from power but could reclaim it at any moment. Ready? He asked. She looked down at herself. The black dress Alara had given her fit perfectly, the silver embroidery catching the torchlight. She'd left her hair loose, letting it flow down her back in dark waves shot through with silver. And her eyes, she'd stopped trying to hide the glow. Let them see. Let them all see what she was. Yes, she said. He smiled and offered his arm. Then let's show them what the goddess's wrath looks like. The doors opened. The hall fell silent instantly, completely silent as every head turned toward them. She walked through those doors with her head high and her hand resting lightly on the second son's arm. The crowd parted before them like water, wolves stepping back instinctively, recognizing power when they saw it even if they didn't understand its source. The torches flickered as she passed, guttering in a wind that existed only around her. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, each one ringing like a bell. And at the far end of the hall, seated on a raised dais beside his golden-haired Luna, the Alpha stood. Slowly. Like a man in a dream. His face had gone pale, his silver eyes locked onto hers with an expression she couldn't read. Shock, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Her sister sat frozen beside him, her mouth slightly open, her hands gripping the arms of her chair hard enough that her knuckles were white. The second son guided her forward, his movements calm and deliberate, giving the assembled alphas plenty of time to take in every detail. They stopped in the center of the hall, directly in front of the dais. The second son bowed, not deeply, just a slight incline of his head that was more acknowledgement than respect. "Brother," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "Forgive the interruption. But I've brought someone I thought the council should meet." The alpha's jaw was so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "What is this?" "This," the second son said, gesturing to her, "is justice. This is the consequence of breaking sacred law." He turned to address the entire hall, his voice rising. "I present to you the last daughter of the Moon-blessed. The true heir of the goddess's power. The woman my brother rejected and tried to destroy." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Wolves turned to each other, whispering, their eyes wide. "That's impossible," one of the alphas called out. "The Moon-blessed are extinct." "Are we?" she asked, and it was the first time she'd spoken since entering the hall. She raised her hand, and golden light bloomed from her palm, bright enough to outshine every torch in the hall. It spread across the ceiling like lightning, illuminating every corner, every face, making the ancient stone shine like it was made of gold. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some wolves actually stepped back, their faces showing fear. She closed her hand, and the light vanished, leaving only the torches burning again. "The Moon-blessed are not extinct," she said calmly. "We were just waiting for the right moment to return." The Alpha descended from the dais, his movements stiff. "You're supposed to be in your cell." "I was," she agreed. "But your brother set me free. Turns out, you have no authority over me anymore. You made sure of that when you severed our bond. You're dangerous." "I'm powerful," she corrected, echoing the second son's words from months ago. "There's a difference." She took a step toward him, and to her satisfaction, he actually backed up half a step before catching himself. "You broke sacred law," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the hall. "You severed a bond blessed by the goddess herself. You rejected your true mate because you thought she was weak. Because you valued appearances over destiny. I did what was best for my pack." "You did what was easiest for you," she interrupted. "And now, you're going to pay the price." The challenge was issued before the Alpha could respond. The second son stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority that made even the most powerful alphas in the room straighten. "I challenge you, brother," he said. "For the right to rule Silvercrest. For breaking sacred law. For disgracing our bloodline with your cowardice." The hall erupted into chaos. Alphas shouted, Lunas gasped, guards moved to surround the dais. But the Alpha raised a hand, and silence fell again, though it was strained, fragile, ready to shatter at any moment. "You would challenge me?" the Alpha asked, his voice low and dangerous, his wolf rising to the surface. "For her. For justice," the second son corrected. "You severed a bond with a Moon-blessed. Do you understand what that means? What you've done?" He turned to address the assembled alphas. The old laws are clear. To reject a moon-blessed mate is to reject the goddess herself. The penalty is death or exile. And yet my brother not only lives, he sits on a throne and parades his replacement mate like a trophy. The bond was a mistake, the Alpha said, but his voice lacked conviction now. She was human. She was never human, the second son said. She was moon-blessed, and you were too blind to see it. Too arrogant to question. Too weak to fight for what the goddess gave you. The word weak hit like a physical blow. The Alpha's face flushed with rage. I am not weak, he snarled. Then accept the challenge, she said quietly. Prove it. The Alpha's gaze snapped to her, and she saw it the moment he realized he had no choice. If he refused, he would look like a coward in front of every Alpha in the north. But if he accepted... Fine, he bit out. I accept. The crowd pressed back, forming a wide circle in the center of the hall. The second son moved to one side, removing his sword belt and handing it to an attendant. The Alpha descended from the dais, his movements controlled despite the fury radiating from him. He stripped off his formal coat, revealing the warrior's build beneath. They faced each other across the circle, brothers who had once been close, now enemies divided by law and justice, and the woman standing at the edge of the ring. Yield, and you can keep your life, the second son offered. Step down from your position, accept exile, and this ends peacefully. Never, the Alpha spat. Then we do this the hard way. They shifted simultaneously, bones cracking, fur rippling across skin, transforming from men into massive wolves in the space of a heartbeat. The Alpha's wolf was impressive, silver-gray fur, massive shoulders, eyes that burned with golden fire. He was built for dominance, for power. But the second son's wolf was larger. Darker. Where the Alpha was built like a warrior, the second son was built like an executioner. They crashed together in the center of the circle with a sound like thunder. The fight was brutal beyond anything she'd imagined. These were not common wolves trading blows, these were Alphas, apex predators with centuries of warrior bloodline in their veins. They moved too fast for human eyes to track, a blur of fur and fang and blood. The Alpha drew first blood, his jaws closing around his brother's shoulder, tearing deep. But the second son twisted, using the Alpha's own momentum against him, throwing him across the circle hard enough to crack the stone floor where he landed. They fought with a savagery that made the watching crowd gasp and flinch. Blood slicked the floor. The sound of snarling and snapping filled the hall, punctuated by the wet crunch of teeth meeting flesh. But gradually, slowly but inevitably, the tide turned. The second son was faster. Not stronger, but smarter. He'd waited years for this, had trained for it, had planned every move. He knew his brother's fighting style, knew his weaknesses. And he exploited them ruthlessly. The Alpha's wolf began to flag, his movements slowing, his breathing labored. Blood matted his silver fur, dripping onto the stones. And then the second son pinned him. It happened so fast the crowd barely had time to react. One moment they were circling each other, and the next the second son's jaws were locked around the Alpha's throat, pressing hard enough to draw blood but not hard enough to kill. Not yet. The Alpha shifted back to human form, his body trembling beneath his brother's massive wolf. His skin was torn, bleeding from dozens of wounds. His breath came in ragged gasps. Yield, the second son's voice came out garbled through his wolf's mouth, but understandable. The Alpha's eyes burned with hatred and humiliation. Never. The jaws tightened. The Alpha cried out in pain. Stop. Her voice cut through the hall like a blade. The second son's wolf looked up, his storm-grey eyes meeting hers in silent question. She walked into the circle, her black dress whispering across the blood-stained floor. Every wolf in the hall tracked her movement, their faces showing a mixture of fear and awe. Let him live, she said, looking down at the Alpha who had once been everything to her and was now nothing but a broken thing bleeding on the floor. The second son released him, stepping back and shifting to human form. He stood naked and blooded but unbroken, victorious. The Alpha collapsed, gasping, trying to push himself up on shaking arms. She crouched down beside him, close enough that only he could hear her next words. You wanted me to watch you crown my sister, she said softly. You wanted me to see everything I'd lost. To break me with the weight of what might have been. The Alpha's eyes met hers, and she saw understanding dawn in them. Saw the beginning of true fear. So now, she continued, you will watch me crown your brother. You will watch him take everything you built, everything you loved, everything you thought you'd secured. And you will know, every single day for the rest of your pathetic life, that it was your choice that brought you here. Your arrogance. Your cowardice. No, he whispered. Yes, she said. And you will live with it. Because death would be too easy. Too quick. I want you to suffer the way you made me suffer. I want you to feel powerless the way you made me feel powerless. She stood and turned to the second son. The pack is yours, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. The second son inclined his head in acknowledgement. Then he turned to the assembled Alphas, to the hundreds of witnesses who had watched this unfold. I claim Silver Crest, he declared. By right of combat. By right of blood. By right of justice. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. And I claim her, he said, gesturing to her, as my Luna. If she'll have me. The hall went so silent she could hear hearts beating. She looked at him, this man who had freed her, trained her, given her the tools for revenge but never demanded anything in return. I accept, she said. And the hall erupted. The coronation was held 3 days later, after the council had concluded and the other packs had begun their journeys home. But many stayed. Stayed to witness history. Stayed to see a moon-blessed crowned as Luna for the first time in 3 centuries. Stayed to watch the fallen Alpha kneel before his replacement. The grand hall had been transformed. Where before it had been a place of politics and posturing, now it was a temple. Silver cloth draped from the ceiling, moonstone crystals hung from every surface, and the ancient symbols of the goddess had been painted on the walls in luminous paint that glowed in the darkness. She stood before a mirror in her preparation chamber, and the woman looking back at her was a stranger. The dress was silver this time, liquid starlight-made fabric, flowing from her shoulders to the floor in a waterfall of light. The bodice was fitted, embroidered with golden thread that traced the symbols of the moonblessed across her skin. Her hair had been woven with silver chains and moonstones. And a circlet of white gold rested on her brow, not the Luna's crown yet, but a promise of what was to come. Ilara stood behind her, adjusting the final details with careful hands. Your mother would be proud, the old woman said softly. She never wanted this life for you, the burden of being moonblessed, the target it would paint on your back. But seeing you now, she smiled. She would be proud of what you've become. I wish she could see this, she said, and it was true. She wished her mother could see her standing tall instead of broken, crowned instead of caged. She does, Ilara said with certainty. The goddess sees through the eyes of all her daughters. Your mother is watching. And she is proud. A knock came at the door. The second son entered, resplendent in formal leathers dyed midnight black, with silver thread tracing the crest of Silver Crest across his chest. His hair had been pulled back, revealing the strong lines of his face, the storm-grey eyes that had seen her at her lowest and helped lift her to her highest. It's time, he said. She took a deep breath and nodded. They walked through the corridors of the Winterfang stronghold together, side by side. Guards lined the hallway, bowing as they passed. Pack members who had come to witness the coronation whispered and pointed, their faces showing awe. The doors to the grand hall opened, and the assembled crowd rose as one. But she barely noticed them. Her eyes were locked on the 2 figures kneeling at the base of the dais where the thrones waited. The Alpha, the former Alpha, knelt in simple clothes, stripped of all insignia, all symbols of rank. His head was bowed, his hands bound with silver chains that would burn his skin if he tried to shift. Beside him knelt her sister. The golden-haired beauty looked diminished somehow, smaller without the crown she'd worn for such a brief time. Her face was streaked with tears, real ones this time, not the false tears she'd used to manipulate. She and the second son walked down the aisle together. The crowd parted before them, wolves bowing their heads in respect or fear or simple acknowledgement of power. When they reached the dais, the high priestess stepped forward. She was different from the priestess who had performed the coronation in Silvercrest, older, more powerful, her eyes blind with cataracts but seeing more than any sighted wolf. The goddess has spoken, the priestess intoned, her voice somehow filling the vast hall without being raised. She has chosen her champion. She has marked her vessel. And she demands justice for the wrongs done in her name. She turned to the kneeling forms at the base of the dais. You, she said to the former Alpha, broke the most sacred of laws. You severed a bond blessed by the goddess herself. You rejected her chosen, believing in your arrogance that you knew better than divine will. For this, you forfeit your right to rule. For this, you forfeit your rank. For this, you are cast down from Alpha to Omega, the lowest of the low. The former Alpha's body shook, but he made no sound. And you, the priestess said to her sister, accepted what was not yours to take. You wore a crown meant for another. You stood in a place that was not yours. For this, you share in his punishment. You are stripped of your title. You are no longer Luna. You are nothing. Her sister sobbed, the sound echoing through the hall. The priestess turned away from them, dismissing them as beneath her notice, and faced the second son. Do you accept the burden of leadership? She asked. Do you swear to rule with justice and strength? To protect your pack with your life? To uphold the old laws and honor the goddess who watches over us all? I do, the second son said, his voice steady and strong. The priestess produced a crown different from the Luna's crown that had been placed on her sister's head months ago. This one was larger, more ornate. Made of silver and set with sapphires that caught the light like captured stars. She placed it on the second son's head. I name you Alpha of Silver Crest, she declared. May your rule be long and just. The crowd erupted in howls of approval, the sound shaking the rafters. The new Alpha turned to her, and his eyes held a question. She stepped forward, and the priestess produced the Luna's crown. The same crown her sister had worn, now cleansed and re-blessed for its rightful bearer. Do you accept this bond? The priestess asked. Do you accept the role of Luna, protector of the pack, keeper of the old ways, vessel of the goddess's power? She thought of all the paths that had led her here. The rejection. The cell. The awakening. The training. The return. I do, she said. The crown was placed on her head, and the moment it touched her hair, power exploded outward from her in a wave of golden light that washed over every wolf in the hall. They gasped, staggered, some fell to their knees as the sheer force of the goddess's presence overwhelmed them. When the light faded, when the world stopped spinning, the priestess was smiling. I name you Luna of Silver Crest, she said. Moon-blessed. Goddess chosen. The first of her kind to be crowned in 3 centuries. The hall erupted again, but this time the howls were different. Not just approval but reverence. Worship. She looked down at the kneeling forms of the former Alpha and her sister. He looked up at her, and his face was hollow, destroyed. All his pride, all his certainty, all his arrogance had been burned away, leaving only the empty shell of a man who had lost everything. I loved you, he whispered again, the same words he'd said in the empty hall months ago. This time, she didn't respond. Didn't acknowledge the words. Because they didn't matter anymore. He didn't matter anymore. She turned away, taking her place beside her new mate on the twin thrones that dominated the dais. The new Alpha, her Alpha, leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Regret. She looked out at the assembled crowd, at the former Alpha and her sister being led away in chains, at the wolves who now bowed to her instead of looking through her. None, she said. And she meant it. The goddess whispered in her mind, warm and satisfied. Well done, daughter. Your revenge is complete. But she knew better. The revenge wasn't complete. It would never be complete as long as the former Alpha drew breath, as long as he had to wake every day and remember what he'd thrown away. Death would have been mercy. This, watching him live with his choices, watching him kneel while she ruled, this was justice. This was power. This was everything she'd been denied, everything she'd been told she could never have. And it was only the beginning. He knelt for her coronation. Now he'll kneel for the rest of his life. This isn't the end of her story, it's just the end of his.